Salutations, dear viewers. This is George from Ireland. I'm continuing my series about why the UK should not pay reparations to India for the British Raj. Incidentally, this video is absolutely not anti-Indian. This is pro-Indian. I'm not denigrating India or anything like that. I've been to India a few times. I've spent several months there, so I hold India in the very highest regard. This debate is absolutely not the British Isles versus India. And this is a point which needs to be emphasised much more. The British Raj was largely an Indian achievement. It could not have existed without the endeavours of Indians and the willpower of huge numbers of Indians. But I shall return to that point. So the Honourable East India Company purchased Calcutta, or Kolkata as it now is. The title deed said it belonged to the company in absolute sovereignty. When the company was liquidated in 1858, the British government took over the property of the East India Company. So therefore, should India compensate the UK because it belonged to the UK in absolute sovereignty? Now, I don't think India should, because obviously the United Kingdom agreed to Indian independence and no claim for compensation was made at the time. But if British rule was so monstrous, why did huge numbers of Indians move from Indian-ruled states to Calcutta when it was under British control and much of India was not? Why did people vote with their feet and flock to British-ruled areas of the country? Because you should know that the establishment of the British Raj was very gradual. It was by myriad different steps. It wasn't overnight. Moreover, in case you don't know, there were princely states right until 1947. About a third of the territory, about a quarter of the population were princely states. And these Indian rulers, we call them prince as a generic term, but they had all sorts of other titles like Gaikwar, Nizam for some Muslim rulers, or Shah, Khan for Hindu rulers, often Raja, Maharaja. I can't remember the other ones. So the East India Company was given the right to govern Bengal on the behalf of the Mughal Empire in the late 18th century. The East India Company was just another Indian state, admittedly a unique sort of Indian state, which underscores the point that British rule existed in India because Indians agreed to it. The Mughals themselves were foreigners of Mongolian origin, had come in via Persia, speaking Persian. So Persian was the official language of many North Indian states into the 19th century. Again, this is a point that's overlooked. India, particularly North India, had been foreign ruled for several centuries before the Britishers arrived. The British were not the only Europeans ruling parts of India. There were Frenchmen, Portuguese, and even Danes ruling small areas of India. The Danes sold up their pupils of land in the 19th century, and you may know that the British, not the British, sorry, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the French were there until even after the British Raj was dissolved. So the First World War, Hindustan had 250 million people, and at one point there were only 40,000 British troops in India. Let me repeat that. 250 million Indians and 40,000 British troops. So the British were outnumbered how many by the Indians? Okay, we could discount women as not fighting and children not fighting, but even Indian men, they were outnumbered the British by how many? Even men of military age. The British Army was hugely outnumbered by Indians. You may say that the Britishers had firearms, which is true, but they were still outnumbered 10 to 1 by armed Indians. There was the Indian Army in the service of the British monarch, the Emperor of India. There were the armies of princely states as well, the Indian police, who were all armed. Indians were trained as fighter pilots, as tank crew, and so on. So they had access to heavy weapons, most modern military technology. It's unfashionable to say this, but it bears repeating. The British Raj existed precisely because Indians willed it to exist. It could not have existed without the active support of very large numbers of Indians. The British soldiers in India were paid by the British taxpayer, and they spent their salaries in India, so that was money going into India. Incidentally, in the Second World War, the Indian Army was being mechanised, was getting more tanks, getting rid of its horses, and it was agreed that the British taxpayer would pick up the bill, not the Indian taxpayer. And obviously all this military technology stayed with India and the newly created Pakistan after independence. Many Indian nationalists say that those who served the British Raj were traitors. Well, that's an awful lot of traitors. Congress and the BJP and so forth would say the men and women who obeyed the British Raj were paid. Is it 30 pieces of silver? They were paid. That does not obviate heartfelt loyalty. Everyone's paid for their job. That doesn't mean that nobody believes that they're doing something which is morally worthwhile. People need remuneration. They can't live without it. The Indian security services are paid these days. Does that mean that they don't bear any genuine allegiance to their country? Are they just hirelings? I don't think so. If those who served the British Raj were traitors, why wasn't a single one of them put on trial for high treason, for aiding enemy occupation? Some of these people are still alive who were serving the Raj until 1947. There were soldiers, police officers, sailors, judges, bureaucrats, rulers of the princely states. They all cooperated with the Raj with fulsome enthusiasm in most cases. High treason still carries the death penalty in India, waging war against India. Some of these so-called collaborators that rose to very high rank in independent India, in the military and elsewhere. So charge them with treason if you really believe that they sold their souls, that they betrayed the motherland. Dr. Tharoor said that the United Kingdom owes 50 billions of pounds for the Second World War alone. He stated that Indians fought for the British Empire, which is correct. They were all volunteers, the largest volunteer army ever raised. Even today, when the world population is over 3 times higher than it was in the 1940s, that is still the largest volunteer army ever. This is unlike the Britishers, most of whom were conscripts to the British Army. Do Indians in the Indian Army today feel loyalty to India? Yes, of course they do. The fact that they're volunteers to the British Raj suggested those Indian soldiers at the time felt some loyalty to the Raj. Anyway, so some Indian soldiers who fought for the British Empire were killed. That doesn't mean the UK should compensate them now. They were paid at the time and their families were paid pensions afterwards. Those who won the Victoria Cross, they had money paid to them for the rest of their lives. Remember John Major in the 90s, he increased the pension paid to such people tenfold, going from something like £50 a year up to 500, which was a tidy sum in India in 1995. Right, what else are we going to say? Now, I don't delude myself. People enlist in the army for several reasons, not solely idealistic ones, not solely patriotism, but they need a job, the sense of camaraderie and adventure. They want to learn a trade, all sorts of reasons. It's not only because they believe in the cause or the identity, though there is an element of that. So these Indian soldiers in the Second World War were defending India. Nehru and those of his ilk had long excoriated the Japanese occupation of India, which was savagely cruel. As George Orwell wrote in the 1920s, when he was lambasting the British Empire, Orwell wrote, "I know this. It is a great deal better than any of the younger empires which are striving to supplant it." And he wrote that before the Nazis came to office in Germany. The brutal occupation of China puts the British Raj in perspective. If Japanese aggression was to be resisted, then Britishers and Indians had to stick together. Unlike British rule, the Japanese did nothing for the people of the colonies. They were going to attack India, not just because it was a colony. They attacked China and Korea, which were independent. And the Japanese were openly exploitative, savagely racist, deliberately killed huge numbers of civilians on many occasions, literally brought back slavery, forcing women to work as prostitutes in military brothels and things like that. Had Chinese smoking opium, which they wouldn't allow their own people to take. I know what you're going to say. The British produced opium in India until 1910, which is true. And Indians were allowed to take it, as Britishers were allowed to take it. In fact, that was a century ahead of its time, because people now mostly think, the informed opinion is, that decriminalisation is the way to go to deal with substance abuse. Anyway, if the Third Reich had won the Second World War, it would not have made the world safe for democracy, and Dr. Tharoor claimed to cherish democracy. How much more racist was Nazism than British imperialism? Look at the Free Indian Army, Azad Hind Fauj, founded by Subhash Chandra Bose, who was an outspoken admirer of Adolf Hitler. Hitler was obviously viciously racist against all non-white peoples except the Japanese. So it would not have turned out nicely for India if that had happened. And all through the 30s, Congress had said we must do something about fascism and we must support the Spanish Republic and so on. But when the UK actually did that, Congress did its damnedest to undermine the war effort. So from early on, Indians were admitted the most outstanding educational institutions in the UK. You could look at Sri Aurobindo going to St Paul's School and Maharajas going to Eton and so on. Nehru going to Harrow and Trinity College, Cambridge. So the top universities were open to Indians. It gives lie to the notion that the Raj was about institutionalized racism, though I don't dispute that racist attitudes existed at the time. Racism was not invented with the British Raj. Ethnic and religious prejudice has always existed, might always exist in the future. We should try to reduce it. And of course, there's much racial and ethnic animus within India even today. And I know most Indians are against this, but it's a worldwide problem and it's an eternal problem. So don't overemphasize the severity of this problem during the Raj.